I'm Joann Watson. I am a public servant. I'm currently serving on the Detroit City Council. Actually, I am completing my first full term. I say that because I run into people all over the city who sometimes feel as if I've been there a long time. My name is may have been known prior to election in 2003 because of my service with Congressman Conyers as a public liaison, where I worked with him as a staff employee for the U.S. House of Representatives addressing health care, racial profiling, an issue that came into being when I was a director of the NAACP. So that racial profiling term was coined by the NAACP, which I led at that time in Congressman Conyers' office, Driving While Black. I also worked on reparations. I was a point person on issues like domestic violence, and it was a wonderful opportunity for 7 years. Prior to that, I worked for the Detroit branch NAACP, which is the largest civil rights unit in the nation, the largest membership, and that was a blessed opportunity, doubled the membership during my tenure. And also played a key role in the implementation of the Million Man March. Detroit had more marchers than any other city. 10% of the marchers, the Million Man March came from this great city of Detroit. Prior to that, I was a director of the YWCA, where Comerica Park is sitting right now, was my YWCA. I was promoted from that position to work for the National YWCA as a director of racial justice, a position created by Dr. Dorothy Irene Height, one of my mentors, and loved that. I did a national convocation on hate crimes and organized college campuses around the country to address hate crimes. We did so good a job that we were threatened. I was informed by the FBI, other folks in the Justice Department, and just prior to my coming back to Detroit to lead the NAACP, we had a huge conference in Phoenix, Arizona, to combat hate crimes in college campuses, and we were told by the federal government not to have it because we were under threat from the militia and some other hate groups. I said, that's the reason we're doing it. No, we're not going to stop it. So Reverend Dr. C.T. Vivian, Dorothy Irene Hyde, Irene Inteviews, Wilma Mankiller, only woman leader of a Native community. We went, and nobody suffered any physical consequences as a result of that. So I've had a very blessed life as an activist. Very happy to be bringing that activist spirit to the Detroit City Council. You know, I'm a workaholic, so I don't really prioritize one, even when the council's allegedly on recess. I've got task force meetings tomorrow. I have a Bank on Detroit a task force meeting to provide more credit worthiness for Detroiters who are far too dependent on local check cashing outlets to cash basic checks. Sometimes they're being charged 30 cents on the dollar for cashing checks over. It's a predatory influence that this does a disservice to our people. Of course, the banks are no great shakes either, so I'm organizing the banks to ensure that citizens have access to free checking, no more disrespect when they go into banks asking for 16 pieces of ID. So we want to change the nature, the climate of the banking and the credit union industry in the city, but at the same time, in the current wave of clear predatory exploitation that makes sure that our citizens can never save. Even the income tax refunds they get, if they cash them at the local outlets, they're only getting 2/3 of what is due them, and that is unconscionable in a city where the people are in such economic straits as Detroit. So that's exciting, and we're rolling out a lot of initiatives with that. The banking industry, because they're in trouble too, credit unions, and grassroots groups, including the Accounting Aid Society, United Way, NAACP. A lot of groups are on board to support Bank on Detroit. Who knows what's accurate? No one knows. There's been no forensic audit, which there ought to be, so I'm calling for that. I have called for it. I've said it at the council table to persons from the executive branch who represent the financial end of the executive branch. And they say, we can't afford that. We can't afford not to have it in a city that has $300 million owed from accounts receivable. So there are many CPAs who will say, if you have $300 million owed to you, why are you saying you have a deficit? Why don't you aggressively go after what's owed? I think the city should immediately, and I've already done that with the governor, Then I'm very grateful the Michigan Citizen covered it very well when a law student interning in my office for free uncovered $130 million owed to the city by the state of Michigan during the era when Engler and Archer were in power. They made a promise and they broke the promise. And there's lots of money and then there are hills we ought to go after. I also believe the budget means that you don't keep spending. There should be no deficit spending. A department that is in deficit should not have the right to ask for any more contracts. If you're in deficit, take care of the deficit and heads out of row. The deficit reduction is, I think, right now being used as a ruse to privatize the city, to have no commitment at all to workers. And the city is one of the largest employers in the city. So if we don't have a commitment to take care of the workers who live in the city, whose children go to public schools, who are part of the tax base, then what are you going to do with this major city, which ought to have rapid transit, which ought to have citywide recycling, which ought to have renewable energy going on, surrounded by all the water that impacts the Great Lakes? You do not give up all your assets. You don't give up on your workers if you're a major city. Yeah, that should be paramount, and there should be a forensic audit, because until that happens, the statements made about the city's deficit are not grounded in fact. There ought to be a factual analysis, which cannot happen without a forensic audit. I fought for the elimination of the Department of Administrative Hearings, would have saved the city $2 million annually. That department only brings in $600,000. I fought for the elimination of other departments. Any department that only cropped up in the last 7 years clearly is not critical to the city's survival if it just happened in the last administration, like general services. We are in no position to subsidize or massage new departments during this kind of time. I think we should get rid of all deputy directors. I don't think anyone should be making over $100,000. There's a move right now urging all elected officials, I think it should be all appointees, period. Anyone who's driving a city car, I think, should turn it in. I think this is more symbolic because, cars are already paid for. The mayor's talking about disrupting bus service, which I completely oppose. In fact, I ran into the mayor this morning at Northwest Activity Center, and I don't just do pats on the back and hi, glad to see you. I said, Mr. Mayor, you cannot disrupt bus service. 40% of our people don't have cars. So it's rendering them into the prisons of their own domiciles. If they can't get out, they have to have access to bus service. It's not a premium. It's not a perk. And every other major city has access to rapid transit, which I'm calling for with the Marshall Plan for the city. But we don't have rapid transit yet. While we move toward that, you can't disrupt bus service. It disproportionately impacts those with disabling conditions, elders and youth, and poor people, all who deserve public transportation. And it calls for that in the preamble of the city charter. It calls for that. Section 1 of the preamble of the city charter.
I'm sorry, what the city charter says what?
It calls for the city providing access to housing, water, and safe, reliable, convenient transportation. Unquote.